What Steve failed to mention to you is he and I were college roommates, and that I bribed him for this opportunity to come speak to you today. Was it 1878? 1878, all right. Yeah. So email address before I forget, because I didn't put it on there, but it's real easy. Craig Willet, you see that there? Just craig@craigwillet.com. So spelling of my last name is there. I'm grateful for the opportunity that's been given to me to be here today and talk to you a little bit. As I reflected over the holiday time about what might be meaningful, as I put myself back in your shoes, because I did attend these when I was a student here. And this room did exist when I was a college student here. That what might be meaningful, and I look at my life and I think of a word that could describe it, and I think the word that I'd like to focus on today is opportunity. One, how to spot them, and then how to seize those opportunities and take advantage of those to be able to provide for your family and give meaning to your life. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So I want you to look at this. Who is the one seizing the opportunity in here? Is it the bear? Who thinks it's the bear? Raise your hand. How many think it's the salmon? A few of you? All right. I guess it depends on your perspective, right? Oh, is it moving? Did it stop moving? All right, it was moving. All right, so the bear and the salmon. The bear's perched there, right? It must be spawning season. He's catching the salmon. It's swimming upstream. What's important about this is salmon swim downstream after they're born. They go out they're born in fresh water, and then they go out into the ocean in salt water, and that's where they spend most of their life. They gather up their energy, they store up their fat, and then they swim upstream. By the time they get there to spawn, they're fairly tired. The best fish to eat are the ones that are in the ocean, not the ones that are in the fresh water, if you like salmon. I like salmon. What's important to me about that symbolizes, at a point in my life, it became not so much about me being the bear trying to catch as much salmon as I could and take all the opportunities that came to me, but also to swim upstream and to be able to spawn and give that opportunity to what I call the next generation of entrepreneurs. So I hope what I share with you today could be meaningful. And I remember I was like number 3 here when I was sitting in your shoes. You know, if I don't get an A on that next test, I'm going to be looking for another major and or transfer to another school. I felt a lot of pressure. And that's when I started to lose hair. I grabbed on and wanted to quit. How many of you know that President Trump moved Winston Churchill's bust back into the White House shortly after his inauguration? Okay. Significant? I don't know, significant or not. But Winston Churchill, very interesting man. He saw a lot of opportunities through difficulties. And he said a pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. Now let me tell you a little bit about him. He tried to get into military college and he failed the test the first 2 times. He hired a tutor and got in the second time. For me, I learned from him. I just hired the tutor and passed the CPA exam the first time. I didn't try the other way. He also was a prisoner. When he got into the military, he was a prisoner in South Africa. And he and 3 other guys tried to break out. He climbed the wall, made it over, and the other 2 ran back to the prison. He went out, stopped at a home, happened to be the home of a British coal miner, and he hid in the coal mine for 3 days, and he came home kind of a national hero for breaking that. It formed his career. He took a risk in the light of difficulty. How many of you, like me, maybe being in prison would say, oh, I'll just kind of hope that maybe my country comes and breaks me free. But he saw an opportunity to get out, and he took that opportunity. Also, he didn't always experience success. He actually was what would be similar to the Secretary of the Navy. And as Secretary of the Navy, mounted probably the most casualties for his country during World War I by one of the attacks he had planned. But as you know, if you study history, he became a very key ally to the United States in defeating Nazi Germany in World War II. So he didn't let that end his career. It did end his career in the Navy, but it didn't end his political career. So how do you find opportunities that come to you? I firmly believe that opportunities do knock. I know it's a trite phrase, we hear it many times, but those of us with our religious beliefs, we believe in receiving a patriarchal blessing, right? Where we are kind of told some things about our life. about what we can become. I think it also takes, you may call it luck or hard work, but being in the right place at the right time. You've heard, and you will hear other people tell stories about where they were and how they were in the right place at the right time for what they were trying to do that led to their success. They were able to capitalize on that. I think another key is not trying to be somebody else, but try to be the best at what you are doing right now. Be in the moment. And I'm going to tell you a quick story that I learned that as a teenager in just a minute. And then be aware of the people around you. I talked to one of my sons about coming here and speaking today, and he's a student at another university related to BYU. It's in Idaho. I don't know what they call it now, but Rick's College? No, I mean BYU, Idaho. He said, Dad, don't just talk about your successes. Tell them about what you really experienced. Tell them about the difficult times you also went through too. He said, I go to those lecture series on campus, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to any other speakers, but it's in those difficult moments that we become real to other people. So I love to swim. And when I was a teenager, I had success at swimming. I somehow naturally did well at it, and so I joined a swim team, and one summer was competing, and I won every race that I was in, right? Sounds like I'm bragging. I won every race I was in at the 50-meter freestyle. And I went to a meet that was a regional meet, and I was sitting in the warm-up area, and my coach came over to me, and he said, see that guy sitting over there? I said, yeah. He goes, he's swimming in the lane next to you. He holds the state record in this event. How do you think I felt? How would you feel? Out of the blue, your coach, you're getting ready to go, and you're all mentally prepared. Now all of a sudden you find out you're swimming against the state record holder, and you've been undefeated. I kind of felt a little defeated at that. I started to get nervous. Well, we got up on the starting blocks. I dove in, swam the first lap, got to make the turn, and just as I was making the turn, I was looking to see how I was in comparison to him. And when I made that turn and flipped over, a thought ran through my mind. I saw him, and I was dead even with him. I saw him, and the thought went through my mind, hey, he was looking at you too. Maybe he's heard that you haven't lost yet this year. I don't have any state records, never have, and probably never will. Well, at my age, I never will, unless they have a geriatric one. But so what I did is I buried my head. I don't know if any of you are swimmers in here. Anybody swimmer? Right? It's kind of hard to swim fast if you keep turning your head to the side, right? You can't keep the stroke even. I buried my head, took my last breath, and I went all the way to the wall, never looked over, didn't know where he was, and I didn't know how it finished till I came up out of the water, but I had touched him out, but it wasn't a state record. I beat him that day. I learned a key lesson, that you can't anticipate who your competition is. You can do your research, and you don't know where they're going to come from, but you can only control your performance, and that you have to be the best you are in that moment. I could have given up before I got on the block to say, there's no way, right? We've all done it. There's no way I can beat that person. So why should I try? I'll just get in and do my best, and I'll take a second place, and I'll be happy with that. When I saw I had a chance, and I may have been feeling that way, but when I saw a chance that I was tied with him, really going into the wall, and saw that he was looking at me, I thought, well, maybe he's worried too. So I'm going to stick my head down and go and not take a breath, and I went down. So let me tell you a little bit about today. I'll talk about my real estate business, but before I do, I really want to talk about some things. I mentioned one of the 3 keys about opportunities knocking is to be aware of the people around you. I played football for a year or 2 in high school. I know I looked like it, right? Linebacker. I was actually a running back for a little while. And one of the guys on the football team, we'd go to the 2-a-day practices in the summer before the season started. And he said to me one day, he goes, I have the paper route. It was the Washington Post. I grew up in Washington, D.C. And he said, I delivered in the Washington Post. And he says, I'm thinking of giving it up. Do you want an opportunity to deliver it? And it was kind of a coveted job, right? You can get up early in the morning and do it and still have a life. And I took that opportunity. my kids laugh when I tell them I worked at McDonald's. But when I was 16, I think my parents thought I had too much time on my hands, even though I was swimming in the morning and going to early morning seminary and that, but they just thought I couldn't stay focused enough. So they wanted me to get a part-time job. So I talked to somebody at school, and her sister was the manager of McDonald's, and I got the job flipping hamburgers. It was fun. I liked it because on the break you could get like a small milkshake about this big. That was my favorite part. My dad was a real estate broker, and I grew up learning real estate at the kitchen table. He taught the real estate school, but he was a real estate broker. He had over 70 agents working for him in the Washington, D.C. area. And you'll find out why this might be key. But before I left for my mission, I got my real estate license in the state of Maryland. While I was on my mission, a guy came and visited the mission. And I'm telling you this not to brag. I want you to understand the relationship with people and being able to see what goes on, because I want each of you to be able to think and relate in your life people that you know who might open the doors. As I tell our children, that you're going to find your best jobs based on people that you know already, who know somebody that can make introductions. A guy came traveling through our mission. I got talking to him one day, and I recognized him from the MTC. And we got talking, and he said, you know, Elder Willet, we're looking for somebody to teach French. We have an opening about the time you get back in the fall semester. I said, that's interesting. And then I saw him a few days later, and he said, I already called the director. You have that job. I didn't even tell him I wanted to apply for it, but I was grateful for it. I needed that opportunity. I used to work up here on the 4th floor next to Steve's office when I was a college student. After I taught French for a while at the MTC, one day I was walking down the hall in the Tanner building, and out walked one of my not companions, but one of the missionaries that had served in our mission. And he said, you know, I'm working in here, and we have an opening. Do you want me to introduce you to the director? I think you ought to take the opening. I said, sure, introduce me. I walked right in, met her, and walked right out. And I don't know why that happened, but it was a great experience for me to meet with students who were transferring here from other colleges and being able to help them make that transition to BYU. I painted houses in the summer because I couldn't find a job, so I just started my own business doing that. When I graduated, right, all of you, as you graduate, they're really high on recruiting, right? And Dean Perry was telling me earlier today about the recruiting statistics out of BYU right now. And it's like 95%. Well, I was that 5% that didn't get recruited. I interviewed, and I lost my touch from those other things. You know, newspaper a little bit easier. Working for an international CPA firm was a little harder. I didn't get an offer. And I was wondering about that. My brother was working in Washington, D.C. for another CPA firm, and he said, hey, a guy in my ward is a manager at KPMG. Back then it was called Pete Marwick. He said, let me call him and see if they have an opening. So he talked to him. They flew me out there, and I ended up getting that opportunity. But thanks to my brother, I got my first job out of college. I came back to get a master's degree, and when I was here, I couldn't find a job working for a CPA firm. I passed the CPA exam. I had worked for a year in Washington, D.C., and nobody here seemed to want to hire me. I don't know what this was. I had this love-hate relationship with the CPAs. I don't know how that was going, but so I had my real estate license, and I sold real estate. Well, in the office one day walked a CPA, and he said, my son and I, we got to talking. He said, my son and I are looking for somebody like you to come work for our firm. I had already accepted a job in Phoenix with a large, Arthur Andersen, they went out because of Enron. They went out of business, but one of the big 7 at the time. And I said, well, you know, I already have a job. He said, well, come talk to us anyway. It won't hurt. I'd like to get to know you. And so I went and visited with them. They ended up extending the job to me. I was sitting around on a Sunday afternoon talking to my wife, and I said, well, I don't know, what do you think we should do? And the thought just came to my mind, well, your dad's from Provo. It can't be all that bad. Why don't you just stay here? And so the next day, I was living next to the train tracks and had the window open. It was It was springtime. I was supposed to start working in January. I had to finish up by December with my degree. And train went by when I'm on the phone calling there, and I'm trying to shut the window so he could hear me tell him I'm not coming. And I knew I was burning a bridge then. I knew then if anyone ever found out, especially that firm, but if other firms found out that I took that opportunity to go for a local firm and not a big firm, that I would probably never have that opportunity again. But I felt something. And what I felt is a result of identifying opportunities from developing habits early in life. And one of those habits President Boyd K. Packer talked about. He said, when you go to the temple, the dust of the world seems to settle down and we're able to see clearly. And he made a promise that in our temple service, all the other affairs of our life will be blessed. And as I talk to you today, if there's any successes that I've experienced, they're a result of adopting a habit of going to the temple on a weekly basis. So I decided to accept that job with the CPA firm just based on that thought that came to me that day. I trusted in it. It was a good feeling. From there, I quit after 9 months. I have a hard time staying settled down, right? I mean, my resume wouldn't get me a job anywhere right now. I started my own CPA firm. It grew. It grew to over 700 small business clients. I got an opportunity to testify in the United States Congress on tax law in the House Ways and Means Committee, Senate Finance Committee, and the Small Business Committee. Interesting thing about the Senate Finance Committee, how naive I am. I go there to speak, and I'm glad they didn't tell me till after, but Senator Hatch is the one that called me and asked if I would do it. And I went, and I found out after that the other 3 panelists were all former IRS commissioners, and here I am, just some podunk CPA from Utah. It was a great opportunity for me. Some of what I testified about has become a fixture now even in today's tax code that people take advantage of, but I'm not here to talk about that. I had a client walk in my office while I had my CPA firm one day, and he threw on the desk, he said, "Craig, look at this." And it was for a community bank that was going to be started up. And he said, "What do you think about it?" I said, "I don't know, there's a lot of pages here. Why don't you give me a few days and look at it, and let's get back together, we'll go to lunch." I looked at it, we went to lunch, and I said, "You know, Kent, I kind of like this opportunity." He said, "Good." He got his big smile on his face. He said, "I wasn't going to invest in it unless you liked it." And I said, "Well, maybe I'll change my mind." He goes, "No." He said, "And I would like you to be on the board of that company." And I made an investment, and I did that. It was a great opportunity. When I worked for Pete Marwick in Washington, D.C., the thing I was assigned to was real estate developers, banks, and mortgage companies. And you'll see how that's played an influence in my life. Even in the year that I worked there, the introduction I got to those 3 industries is key and foundational to what I've done. And then I had some clients that didn't like to pay in cash. They were real estate developers. And they said to me one day, "Hey, for the work that you're doing for us, why don't you just take this lot that we have in Provo?" And it was a used car lot. It was a small little thing, and I looked at it and I thought, if that's how you want to pay me, okay, I'll take it. I went and figured out how to get it zoned to build an office building on it. I built my office building, moved my practice in there. Then something happened. One day I was serving as a stake young men's president, and I was asked to train, award youth leadership on a Saturday morning, and my wife was pregnant with our 3rd child. And I went and spoke, and I went back home, and she looked pretty ragged from wrestling with the 2 boys. I said, "Let me go take them for some lunch," and I went to take them for some lunch, and it had started to snow, and I stopped at a light, and next thing you know, out of the blue, somebody hit me from behind. And the boys were fine. They were in their car seats. I had a seatbelt on. I felt a little bit of pain, a little bit of discomfort. The police came. They asked me if I wanted to go in an ambulance, and I said, "No, I don't want to have the experience ever in my life." And I ended up going to work on Monday, and about halfway through the day, I remember I tried to lift my hand up to the desk, and I couldn't lift my hand to my desk. And I tried to stand up, and I couldn't stand up. And that happened on a Saturday, so 2 days later, I started to get some swelling that I wasn't sure what was going on. So I yelled to my assistant, hey, call my wife and get her to come pick me up. I need to go to the hospital. Anyway, I went to the hospital. Well, I don't want to show you that yet. So I went to the hospital. I had to go through some therapy for a while. I ended up not having to have surgery. I ended up doing acupuncture, and something that I learned when I was on a mission in France because I had an accident where a motorcycle hit me on my bike. So I believed in it. But during this time, I was sitting at my desk wondering, what are you going to do? It hurt to sit down for long periods of time while I was going through this rehab. And I started thinking, what is it that you really want to do? Okay, this CPA thing kind of is by default. I tried several other majors, and they weren't right. I wasn't even sure if accounting was right. And I sat there and I thought, how many times are you asked the question, what do you want to do when you grow up? My wife says I haven't grown up because I still haven't figured out. I can't answer that question. But we have imaginations, and I do remember while I was sitting at my desk one day, I had a vivid recollection from back when I was an early teenager of envisioning myself doing something, but I didn't know what it was. I could see myself in my own mind's eye doing something, and I couldn't figure out what it is. And so I personally believe, as Elder Bednar says, that revelations do come, and they come in the form of dreams. And those dreams can come at any time in our life, and we can have recollections where the Holy Ghost can help us remember that. Well, I didn't know what it was, but I did learn, and I'm glad I became a CPA because I had a lot of real estate developers as clients. Why? I got my real estate license. I could speak the lingo. They trusted in me. I could talk their talk, right? I could speak their language, and they thought that was good. They didn't have somebody talking to them just about taxes. They had them talking about their business. And what happened is I learned that that's really what I wanted to do, become a CPA. So what happened? A few days later, after I came to that realization, a friend of mine called from Arizona, a guy I knew from freshman year of college. It wasn't Stephen. And he said, hey, Craig, I've got this opportunity here. I need an investor. My investor just backed out. And I've got to close it in about 2 weeks. And I'm looking for X number of dollars. And I kind of laughed. I said, well, what makes you think I have X number of dollars? And he had been in town earlier, and he saw my house. And I said, well, it has a mortgage on it for X number of dollars, so that's not it. And I said, why don't you, and this is how old I am, fax me the information, and I'll look it over, right, before email. And I did. I was looking it over. The next day I went to the office. A client of mine called, and they said, we have Y number of dollars. We've been trying to invest in real estate, and it's not working. It's from a trust, and we need to find something that's better than what we're doing. And I thought, why don't I put X and Y together? So I called my friend in Arizona, and I said, how would you like me to bring somebody down and introduce them to you? I called my clients and said, how would you like to go to Arizona? It was summer. It was winter. It was March. Who wouldn't want to go to Arizona, 75-degree day, right? They said, sure, let's go. While we were down there, they went and looked at the property. They decided they wanted to do the investment. They cut the deal right there over lunch. I just introduced them. On the plane on the way back, they said, Craig, we know you're a founder of a bank. We don't understand banking at all. We have this money, but it's enough to buy the property, but we don't have enough to develop it. Why don't you help us get a loan and do that, and we'll cut you in for a third just by helping us do that? Now, how many people would go for that deal? Yeah, it's a great opportunity. I took that opportunity, and it turned into what was my dream. We were doing some residential development at the time. Their trust ran into trouble. I bought them out, and I became the sole owner. And then the opportunity for me came out of need. So I know this is going to sound old, but in the early 1990s, in 1986, the real estate market in Phoenix collapsed. Congress changed the tax law, and in Utah, where I was, it went up. And then in Arizona, it crashed. In 1994, it was starting maybe a small recovery. I was down there looking for office space because I was spending almost half my time between the CPA firm and this development work in Arizona, and I couldn't find an office space that had been built in the last 10 years. I like nicer and newer office space, and I couldn't find it. And so I bought some property that had 7 lots on it, and I thought they were trying to sell them individual lots to business owners and then let them build their own buildings on it. And I thought, I think they have the model wrong. Somebody needs to build all 7 buildings and sell them to the business owner, because the business owner doesn't have time to build the building. So that's what I did, and that's what became Utah's development. It became something that was refined over time. I built that first project, and I took and built 3 more right after that and plowed the money back into it. I called it the Professional Village. And let me kind of go over why. So imagine the buildings are together, a couple entry points, but the features of that, my competition was any office building. So, right, big, huge competition, right? That could be scary to say, hey, I don't want to, why should I start a business? This is too scary. But I came up with, well, why don't you own it for less than rent? Rather than pay rent, why don't you own it for less than rent? And the economics worked out to where it was 30% less. Easy to get buyers, low interest rates, high visible locations. That's important because of who our target market was. Front door parking. I don't know how many of you have ever gone to the doctor, drive into a maze of buildings and can't find where the doctor is, right? I always had a hard time. I couldn't find, I go in those business parks and I get lost. So I was trying to make it simple. And then if you're selling to doctors and dentists, right, they go to school for a long time. They come out with a lot of debt. But if they have a building with their name on it, that could really make a difference. Easy access for their clients, especially in Arizona, right? They tend to be older clientele, retirees. Designed to meet their needs, distinctive architecture, and monument signage. So they got to not be a second-class citizen. Most small business owners tend to be treated as second-class citizens. So why is this important? I incorporated in the Professional Village elements that were successful for real estate investment. If you're going to own it for long-term, location, access, visibility, and good construction built to last. Elements of a successful professional practice are having a good location, easy access, visibility. Think about the free advertising when people drive by and there's over 100,000 cars passing your business every day in a prime location. That's free advertising. And timeless, something you can sell to somebody else or rent to somebody else after. Our target market, I've gone over what that is. Doctors, dentists, CPAs, attorneys, insurance brokers. But what gets them is this phrase or question. You want to own a building at the end of after your end of 20 or 30 years of practice? Or do you want to have a pile of canceled rent checks sitting in a box? You can pay the landlord rent, or you can own your building for probably 30% less and still writing checks out for 30 years. So the 3 keys of real estate success are location, location, location. How do we find the right locations? I'm going to skip a little bit. Sometimes they all weren't the right location. I did over 36 developments. 2 or 3 of them were mistakes. Let me tell you a little bit about them. One, I had an employee leave, and he went and did a competing project that I was trying to buy, on some land I was trying to buy. And I went around the corner and found something because I was kind of motivated by, I don't know if it's called revenge or greed. Mine didn't work out very well. And then another one, I broke my rules and did a design that didn't meet the criteria for what I had set because I could get the land cheap, and that I learned a lesson from that. Don't always do it for cheap economics. So people start businesses to make money, right? Oh, not, there's a few nods. I actually think that's the wrong reason to start a business. I think that capitalism's in place for a reason. It's there to assist businesses. Entrepreneurship is the engine that drives our economy. Capitalism should only facilitate it. And so when capitalism becomes outsized and doesn't play the supporting role and becomes a dominant role, it sets up for difficult situations. So having money, I say it's to make a difference in people's lives. If you can come up with a product or service that will make a difference in people's lives, you'll be successful. The money will take care of itself. If you strike a chord on your product or service, it will resonate with your target market. For me, it did. I had doctors getting out of their leases early and buying a couple buildings from me and locating in several locations. I had one tell me one time, he goes, Craig, your buildings are too expensive. He says, I can stay in the back corner of this project and be just fine. Well, his lease ran up, and he called me a few years later, and he said, you know that project you have down the street? Can I buy one of those buildings? And I said, yeah. I didn't remind him how he told me it didn't matter. He didn't need to pay my price. 3 months after getting in, he called me and he said, I have 5 times the walk-in traffic than I had at the other location, and I'm getting more referrals. He was a physical therapist. People were saying, I see your place, and telling the doctors that they went to for surgery, can you refer me to him? Because it's on my way to taking my kids to school or whatever. So his practice nearly doubled overnight from moving into that location. If you can help them be successful and provide to meet their needs specifically, it'll take care of itself. And personally, money can't buy the satisfaction that you get when people call you up and tell you, this has changed my practice, this has changed my life. There's nothing that can replace that. It's not in the getting, it's in the receiving those kinds of compliments that do it. How do we scale it? Brand identity, I think, is really key. I had multiple locations all over the place where people could see it, and it's easy. When I had one location, it was hard. When I had 3, when I had 5, when I had 7 at a time, in the same Phoenix metropolitan area, people started to identify the brand. And I think it has to, I can't say enough, it has to meet the needs of the marketplace. And then sometimes you're lucky. I remember a difficult time when I had gone from 1 project to 3 at one time. And for the first time, I was struggling to meet payroll. I had no partners. My bank, I never borrowed my operating costs from the bank, so I didn't ask them for the money. But one day, somebody called up, and we had just announced a new project, and they said, I want to be right on that corner, and I don't care if you start it right now. How much money do you want to hold that building? I'll write you the check now, not go through the title company. I'll just give it to you. And he flew in a helicopter, met somebody from my office that day on the site, and delivered his money. And it was at a critical time for me. So what did it become? 36 professional villages, more than 1.7 million square feet. 300 business owners purchased $500,000. Many of you are probably too young to remember. You've all heard of the Great Depression, and now they call it the Great Recession. I call it the financial crisis in around 2006, 7, 8, 9 period. Well, capitalism was becoming too much of the driver. There was financial engineering going on in the economy, and I think it overtook. We can learn something from an experience the Savior had. When he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, he had 3 temptations after that. One, right, let's turn the stones into bread, right? Satan came to him and said, why don't you turn the stones into bread? That's appealing to our appetite or passions. The second was, go to the pinnacle of a temple and jump off, and you have command over angels, save yourself. That's vanity. The third is a desire for worldly riches, right? Here's all the kingdoms of the world taken to a high place. Bow down and worship me, and I'll give you all of this wealth. This is from David O. McKay. He says, such temptations come to us in the business relations. And I think it can be globally, and it can come personally. And I'm not here saying that it didn't come to me personally. I told you of greed taking over on at least one of my deals. So what happens when the pool explodes? The financial crisis started. The lender I had, which was our major lender at UTAS, was the second bank in the country to be shut down. Taken over by the FDIC, all of a sudden, I didn't have a lender. Not only that, they weren't going to advance on the loans. I'd already put all my capital in up front, then the bank gives you the next tranche of capital. I had to refinance some of them. I had to work with the FDIC for 1.5 years till I could form a joint venture with the people that eventually bought the notes from them. I had to put in more capital in the business because they wouldn't lend, but I got them to cooperate with me to a certain level. And I thought, I can still do this. I can get through this whole thing. And I did it for a couple of years. And the game changed. I could tell that this may not outlast the effects of a crisis that hadn't happened in over almost a century, since the Great Depression. And so I set a date to reevaluate it, right? I had my oldest son coming home from a mission. I didn't want to tell him I'm shutting the business down that I think he wanted to work in. And so I set a date for a couple months after he got back. And I set it for my dad's birthday, February 1. I think that's in 2 days from now. And that day came, and a few days before that, I got a call from a hospital saying, we're really interested in this location of yours. Let's look at doing a deal. I started talking to him, and I thought, maybe I can stretch out this date that I told Heavenly Father, okay, I'll reevaluate then. Well, the February 1st came, and before 10 o'clock that morning, I'm in my office, and I started feeling numbness in my left arm, numbness in my leg. Next thing you know, an ambulance is there to try to get me and rush me off to the hospital. My wife met me there. And the doctor came in later and he said, why are you here? I said, I don't know. I was hoping you could tell me why I'm here. And he said, you're fine. I went back to the office. I didn't go home. But I called in my key people and I said, let's figure out a way and come up with a plan how to wind this business down. I remember driving to one of my son's golf tournaments with my wife, and I turned to Carol and I said, we might lose everything. I don't know. We have a bank that's failed. We have a lot of guarantees that are out there. The properties that we own are now worth 40% of what we paid for them. I don't know how this is going to shake out. 2 minutes? Okay. Took me 3 years to wind it down. What did I learn from that? Banks are good silent partners when times are good. They're terrible when they have impaired capital. Banks that I even refinanced with, within 2 months of refinancing with them, came to me and were trying to call the loans due, not because of what I was, but because they were worried about the commercial real estate market. I met face-to-face with each creditor except for one and negotiated a satisfaction of all the guarantees that I had. I learned the importance of recurring income. One of the goals that I had when I had the business was to retain 10% of my buildings and lease them out, so I had a recurring income, and I did that. I also learned early on from an account in the scriptures that when Pharaoh had his dream, Joseph told him to save 1/5 every year, building up during the 7 years of planning. I saved 20% in cash for my profits every year. And going to the temple, the answers came quickly, how to do it. So I did UTAS. I started to write a book. I didn't publish it. I wanted to become a mentor to other generations. And opportunities opened up for me where I was able to take people who were nannies, whose wives were nannies to us when we lived here in Provo, that had gone on and had successful careers. And doors opened up where I've helped them start businesses. Nowadays, I'm an integral part of some of those businesses in the life sciences. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. There are only certain things that we can control. But I would hope that each of you would think about whether you are the fish trying to swim upstream and beware of the bears that are out there, but at the same time, look for opportunity in everything you do by being the best at what you do. I had to be the best at negotiating my way out of loans, and I spent 3 years doing that. And I became good at it. I had people hire me once in a while to help them do the same thing. But the opportunities are endless for you, and I hope that when you hear an opportunity knock, you'll be able to seize what that is, see it, see yourself doing it, and have it benefit your life. Appreciate your time.